Hi everyone, this is Sharon. Today I am happy to share with you my latest design team project for the Graphics Fairy. I just want to give you a little bit of background on this project. This journal has been in concept form, I would say, for at least 5 months. About a year ago, I purchased this leather, I don't know if you'd call it a wallet or a folio. I'm convinced it's probably the very first Midori style traveler's notebook because it's a similar size. It's got little eyelets on the top and the bottom where I found this ledger kind of tied in there, and it's dated 1907, so it's quite old, but it's really a neat sort of folio type thing. And this was actually tied in there with a piece of string that was similar to, I would say, a shoestring. So I did take a number of pages from this ledger and incorporated them into my journal. And I have to say too that I was very much inspired by Emily at Junk Journal Inspirations to create this. She was making some vintage wallet journals that she created from something similar to a leather wallet. And I knew I wanted to use this particular one and make it into a journal. I just wasn't sure what kind of theme and how I wanted to use it. And what I decided to do was to make it kind of a working journal. So I envisioned this to be something where you could plan projects, whether they be, now the theme I used for this was actually more of a sewing, embroidery, stitching kind of a theme, but you could certainly use it to plan any kind of junk journals that you might make. If you're like me, I do a lot of planning in a journal for my journals where I record all kinds of things like measurements and techniques and materials I want to use, and maybe little samples of things that I would like to incorporate and notes and things like that. So that's kind of the concept of what I had in mind for this. And like I said, I kind of went off into a sewing and stitching themed sort of subject for this journal. So I just want to show you some of the bundles that I incorporated into the journal. So I took a lot of these images from the Sewing Ephemera bundle, and I also used some of the printables from that kit. So here are some examples of journal pages. Not that one, this one, and this one. And what I did was I had to crop these and resize a little bit so they would fit into my journal, but this is the size that they come out. I also used a number of images from the Seamstress bundle as well. And then I used some of these beautiful French lady cards, and that's from the Vintage Paper Lace bundle. And this is a printable from that bundle. So if we go inside, I used some seam binding for the closure. And what I did was, it took a little bit to figure this out, but I left my strings really long so that I could cinch it up this way as well to hold everything in. But I really just have a bow tied here, and that holds the inserts in the inside. And this is a nice worn leather finish on the outside, and I just girlied it up a little bit with some lace on the front. It opens like this, and there is a pocket on the side. This says stamps, cards, and stamps, but you know, you can tuck things in there. I don't have anything in there now. This is the insert that I made that I will go through, and I've also created a second insert to go along with this journal, and I'll go through that one a little bit later. And so I've got this tied in. Here's the center with that seam binding ribbon. And then there's this section that flaps open. And in there I have this card that I made from a time card, a vintage time card, and I put this pretty lady on there. There's room to make notes and journal on the back. And then here, there's this big, huge compartment that you can stuff things into. And then over on this side, there's another little pocket, and this was in the original when I bought it, so I just left that in there, just some old notes and things. So if we go into the actual journal itself, I used This came from Scarborough Fair, I believe. It was one of the images, so I used that for the cover of my insert, and I just printed that on some cardstock. On the inside cover, I created this little button card, and I just sewed some buttons on there. I did a little bit of slow stitching around the outside to give it a lacy border, and you can see the stitching on the back. This is also one of the printables from the Sewing Ephemera bundle. Here I added this little journaling card and just have some room to write on the back, and I also layered on some pattern paper, sewing pattern paper. This first page is actually one of the pages from that ledger that was in this wallet. Then I incorporated this piece of beautiful vintage fabric as one of the pages. And I thought that would be a fun place to clip on some fabric and trim and lace samples. So here I just added a few from my stash. This side I clipped on some lace samples. This is one of the printables. I backed that with a piece of lace, or a lace image, I should say. And then I created a little belly band with this vintage measuring tape. It's kind of a, I think it's a paper one, feels like paper. Also for one of the pages, I used a vintage sewing pattern envelope. This one is Marie Claire. And then on the back side of that, I created a pocket with one of the images. And then in there, I made this journaling card. And then I inserted some of my sewing ephemera that I've been collecting for quite some time. This is quite old. It had a date of 1800s as far as the patent goes, so I'm not sure if the card is actually that old or not, but I had to put that in there. This page is actually a vintage envelope, and I just love the amber color of the window on there. Another image from one of the bundles. And I will list all the bundles down below in my description. On this page, I just did some stenciling with some ink in a couple of different colors. And then I've got this journaling card. I love the old shoes. I think they are perfect accessories for sewing and stitching. So I've got a lot of shoe images. And then I just put some vintage buttons on there. And then this is the back side. And then on this side of the page, I have one of those lacy ladies. And that just flips open with lots of room for note-taking. This page, I've got several of these in. The inserts came from this old book that I purchased, and it appears to be from the early 1900s, but it's called Works Garment Cutter, and it just has all kinds of really pretty images and instructions for cutting your own garments. So I've got that original page in there. Here in the middle on the strings, I just added some paper hearts. And then here I created a journal card. This was actually one of the printables, and it was intended to be made into a small box. But I took the flaps that were there, and I actually folded them to the back side to create this little corset on here. And that can be opened up, and this can be written on and notes put on there as well. On this side of the page, I have this little side tuck here, and then I created this journal card. This is what the front looks like. And then on the back side, I stapled on this vintage sheet from a sewing pattern instructions. And then some vintage wallpaper on there as well. And then I've used grid paper in several spots in here too. That always makes a nice spot to do sketches and things. Some more of that stenciling on there. I left it light enough that this could easily be used for journaling as well. On this page, I took one of the printables and used it as a thread card. I don't know that it was intended for that, but I just thought that butterfly looked neat with the thread on there. And then I just kind of created that with a swivel brad up there so that the page could still be written on. Another pretty shoe. And this is a page from a vintage ladies embroidery book. And then on this side of the page, I created a pocket. And in there, I made this tag. This is one of the printable pages, and I just added a piece of adding machine tape on there. I thought that would work well for some note taking. Here's the other side of that fabric page, and then I just again pinned on some fabric samples, and then this stamped piece of linen. I just did a little bit of slow stitching to attach that. And then here's the other side of that ledger sheet. Nice place for note taking. And then on this back side, I just had this envelope tucked in there. And this is an altered envelope I made. I just decorated that up a little bit on each side. And in there, I tucked a nice big piece of ledger paper, or grid paper that can be used for sketching and note taking. So that is the first insert. And now that can be removed and kept elsewhere. I made a second insert to go with this as well, and we can take a step through that. It's similar to the other one. I created a cardstock cover for it. And then it's got a button card. This tag. Another beautiful piece of linen for the page. And then I clipped some pretty trims and laces on the back side of that. Here's another sewing pattern envelope that I used for a page. And then I created this pocket with this image, and in there I made this journaling card. I put this image of this hair comb on the top of a wallpaper image before I printed it. And then this is the cover of some music sheets that I put on the back side. Here's another vintage envelope that I used for a page. And then this is the butterfly image I used in this one for the thread card. This is a page from a butterfly book that I have. I just thought that went well. Here I created a shallow pocket, and in there I stuck these instructions from a sewing pattern. And then on the top of that, I just created this fun little cluster. On this side of the page, I stenciled again in a lace pattern on there. And then I clipped this journaling card over the top, and that's got the lacy ladies on the outside. I glued this, it's a paper punched border. I glued that around the outside and then sandwiched that in between two layers of paper and stitched that together. Then I just, on the inside, added a little bit of that vintage wallpaper and some of my coffee dye paper. This is another page from that Works Garment Cutter book that I showed you. And then on this side of the page, I've got this, it's a section of a men's suit, and it's got this really nice label on it. And I just clipped that over the page and stitched it on there. So there's room to journal underneath there. And then I've got this lacy image on the inside here. Couple of flowers on the strings, and then on this side I clipped this vintage French seed packet. This is an original that I bought, and then in there I just stuck a couple of train tickets. On this page I use this wallpaper image, and then that actually folds way out. And on the inside of that, I printed the back side with this lace pattern, and then created this small pocket. And in there, I tucked a few little narrow things, some vintage measuring tape, and then a couple of other just narrow paper pieces that can be used to put quotes or small notes on. And then on the back side of that, I've got this pretty dress image. In this pocket, I created this journaling card with this pretty shoe image. And then on the back, I just used a book page and a sticker. Here is the other side of that envelope that I use for a page, and I just love the inside of it. It's got this blue pattern, so I really didn't want to cover that up, and I just created a little side tuck there and made this little tag. And then on the back, I created a belly band with some trim and just stuck in this little T card. On this side, I created a side tuck, and in there I've got this pretty journaling card. And here I just stapled on some vintage fabric and lace. On this side of the page, I created a side pocket or tuck, and then in there I've got this vintage dress hook page, I don't know, card. It's kind of neat. It's got some measurements, place to measure on the back. I don't know how old it is, but it looks quite old. And then on this side of the fabric page, I clipped this piece of linen that has this stamp of a lamp on there. But again, more samples of laces and fabric can be pinned on there. Back side of that. And then on this page, this is one of those ledger pages from the original ledger that was in the wallet. And you can see where that string was, where it was attached to there. It left a shadow on there. Thought that was kind of cool. And then up here, I just clipped on. This is another piece of ephemera from my stash. It's a needle envelope, I guess you would call it. I don't know how old this one is either. It looks quite old. It doesn't have the needles in it, but it does have like the original paper covering for them. And then on the back, I again tucked in an envelope, and this one I just handmade the envelope from an old paper bag. Covered it with some Florentine paper, and then decorated this side as well. And this also has a piece of grid paper in it. So that is my project for this month for the Graphics Fairy. This journal set will be available in my Etsy shop. It was a lot of fun. I've been wanting to do a sewing themed journal for a long, long time, and I'm sure I'll be doing another one within the year because I do have a lot of sewing ephemera, but it was great fun putting this together. Thank you for joining me today, and until next time, bye-bye.